Welcome, citizens of the globe, to the Frontend Heroes podcast, where we discuss all things villainous and heroic about the front end of software development. My name is Evan Payne, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Scott Francis. How are you, Scott?
I'm really good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty good myself. Getting kind of tired, continually tired. I think that's a global phenomenon, but otherwise pretty good.
Yeah, I think you're definitely right there. Everybody's like kind of in the same boat. Read a few things this week about that, and everybody, especially working mothers out there, seem to be like really struggling with the whole thing, which I can attest to. It's difficult times, but still the work continues, and that can be plenty interesting too.
Absolutely, the work is fantastic for me. I really love what I do, so that part is okay. It's just general. Yeah, I don't know, not enough exercise. I think I said that last time as well. It hasn't changed since then. In any case, today's episode, as ever, is sponsored by NetCentric, an award-winning Adobe Global Alliance partner. And both Scott and I work here as senior front-end software engineers, and we are still so glad to have their support with this show. The title of today's show is Faster Than a Speeding Bullet. And it's we want to talk a bit about performance in general, web performance. And it's a big topic, so I wanted to start by saying, Scott, what does it mean to you when people talk about performance?
For me, it really focuses on like the user experience. It really focuses on how delightful we can make the website. Some of the subjects matter for websites could perhaps be quite dry, and so to say making it delightful is that seems a funny thing. But honestly, we've all been on websites that are really great and perform really fast, and we've been on the other type of website which is really slow, and you start like rage clicking and you don't know what the hell's going on. You think it's broken, the page jumps all over the place, so you're already pushing a button and the button disappears, and then suddenly you've opened up an ad, and it's just absolutely horrible. So to me, the main thing about performance is cutting all of that out and making your site delightful, which I think as a standard, as a standard, the projects that we work on at the moment within NetCentric aim for that as like a default. But as with all these things, there's room for improvement. So in a nutshell, it's about making things a great user experience.
Yeah, I like that. There is a lot of overlap with the user experience of it. And for me, it's a lot about the perception that the user has. And it has a lot to do with speed, which is, it's appropriate. It's the performance of it. It is how fluid and in depth they are allowed to go into the experience. When animation gets janky, you know that you're taxing the computer. It's like, when you used to play whatever, Counter-Strike or something on your PC and it would start to lag, you were maxing out the capabilities. And that made you feel like, oh, this thing's a piece of crap. And you would hit the side of your computer or whatever. Nowadays, we're trying to erase that. We're trying to make everything feel like we got you. No problem. And that's the ideal, right? But it's not always that easy. We're constantly growing our bundle sizes in terms of what we deliver to the client. So much of the stuff that used to be back end is now on the front end and is being done in the client side because it's faster for us to see it. And so it feels like it's better to do it there. And the back end can be quite complex and we don't want to touch that. And then, we're now leading the show half of the time as front enders. So they take our opinions more seriously than before. And yeah, I feel like we've gotten ourselves into a mess. And there's been that article going around as well of do we need to have a discussion about this? And do we need to start moving stuff over back to the servers again? But yeah, we've gotten ourselves into a bit of a pickle. Scott, you've run into a place with your project, I think now, where you're being asked or you're having an opportunity to start to actually look in detail of how is this site that we've built over the last few years performing and what can we do to improve it? What's that been like for you?
Well, all of this kicked off really because, and it was through client interest. And it's something that we've always had in mind. Basically, I'm taking up your point that things are becoming more and more front end. We still try and do as much as we can on the back end, but obviously then the front end takes over, and that's my domain. This was all like the client were also aware of performance. I'm not saying it's bad by any means, because actually when you look at our reports through the new Web Vitals, we actually come out really well, just on that, like a desktop with a good connection. But anyway, I digress. The client actually noticed or became aware of the Lighthouse report, which is something that we've been aware of for a long time. And I think that the thing with the Lighthouse report is the ease with which you can get like some instant feedback really about your site, and the big score, the number at the top. And that's something that would interest people high up in organizations, like, and look at it and think, that seems to be low. Like, why is it this score? So the client were actually aware, and they made inquiries with us if we could but they gave us general tasks like improve performance, without really appreciating, like, that's a big subject. So they just tasked us with that. We kind of looked at the Lighthouse report and tried to do a few things which would make us a little bit better. But just again, it felt to us like headline stuff, not really getting into the real nitty gritty of things. And so we did a few things, but then afterwards, we said, okay, so you're obviously interested in performance. We're really interested in performance as well. We've worked together for a long time now. We have a really mature site. So let's really, instead of like thinking about, oh yeah, we need to add new feature and more components, let's really think about, like, are we giving the best that we possibly can to the end user? And so that was something that we pitched as a general idea to the client. And they were really interested by that. I have to say that, like, and this is no disrespect to them, from conversations that I've had with colleagues at NetCentric about the web performance topic, the clients themselves are happy to be led by the experts, by the people that they're paying to get this stuff done. They're happy to take on advice. And so it gave us a real opportunity to start digging. And the amazing thing at NetCentric is that we have a guy, Fabian, who has been like a champion of performance at NetCentric, and really been vocal about this, and attended as many conferences as he could, gathered as much information and knowledge as he could on the subject. And so I actually went to Fabian, and him and his team and me actually ran like an audit on our site. We covered so many things, like starting at the back end all the way through to everything that we did on the front end, and it was really, really interesting. We came up with a nice report from the findings, and made some recommendations to the client. I mean, the whole process was really in depth and way beyond like the headline grabbing Lighthouse score. And this is something that we presented to the clients a couple of weeks ago, and the response was really better than we could hope for, I have to say. I think that it really pricked the interest of like lots of the stakeholders, which was just a fantastic thing. And it really sets us on a good path, I feel, for the next year at least, to like really have a one team vision of what we're actually going for.
Yeah, I want to ask more about like the details of things, but I do want to highlight that it's really helpful to have access to our own experts. I mean, working at a large consultancy like we do, yeah, like it's innovative even that we have these this little squad of performance experts. Fabian, Armel, Inez, others, right? That is that's a great tool at our disposal, and it really helps us. But if you don't have that, it can be quite overwhelming to sort of get started and find that. That's why tools like Lighthouse are super helpful to point you in the right direction and get things started that way. I know that like I'm not the best at this. I mean, I know the theory. I know like what things to start with to get the easy wins, and I know how to read the Lighthouse scores, and even go into the dev tools and look at the performance tools within there to see like, hey, how's my frame rate doing? How's the waterfall of requests? How is that being set up? But in terms of actual implementation, yeah, there's a lot there, and it's that same old thing with the front end. It's like, oh, here's another thing that you should probably know. we need to know a bit of everything. That for me can be quite overwhelming. Besides having the help of the team, like what did you do to sort of get yourself pointed in the right direction? And what are the? I want to know some more specific things that you really delved into that were maybe the easy wins for you.
Well, actually. Before we got Fabian involved, and as I mentioned, the client had actually asked us to improve things. I'd actually started looking at how we deal the performance or the utilization of the code that we were delivering, like so the JavaScript and the CSS, like what was the kind of usage percentages from that, and I've got the percentages from DevTools, which is really, really useful. And actually, once you delve into that, in my case, I was like quite disappointed that we were delivering so much CSS that was unused. And I think I mentioned last time that we spoke, I then worked on that. Actually, no, this was a different thing. I didn't mention this last time. What I actually decided to do was I read about a few techniques of how we could optimize delivery for CSS, how we could improve that. And I came across basically the same as many of us do, just like troll through some articles, troll through some, and see if you can kind of put together what you think will suit you. The decision that I made in the end was that I decided to split all of my, at the time we were bundling just one giant CSS file, which I accept at the time when the project was set up, that was like best practice. That's what you did. But since then we switched to HTTP2. And so that gave us the opportunity to split the CSS again. So the first step, I thought, right, okay, so I'm going to split, we have components and templates. I'm going to split the CSS. So every component has its individual CSS, and I'm going to deliver that whenever those components are used, whenever that template's used, whenever the components are used.
Yeah, and just to give some context for listeners, the project we're talking about is within Adobe Experience Manager, which has its own templating system and unique way of delivering the content. So it's not as simple as maybe with Vue or Angular, where you can bundle the CSS and that's sort of naturally done. This was an extra step that was not normal. Yeah,
that is really worth mentioning. And I've become so used to the environment that I forget sometimes the other scenarios. But yeah, going back to this, so I decided that I would split each set of CSS per component. I did that, switch things, like use Webpack to actually just to split those. And then, so I had that working and I thought, well, this is nice. This works really well. But then I got to thinking, well, actually, for a mobile, I'm still delivering like a huge amount of CSS, which isn't really used. Which isn't used. And I don't want that to slow down the page load. So what I decided was, I investigated a few things, but what I decided was I was going to split by breakpoint and then have the build split the component down into 3 different CSS files. So small, medium, large, for instance. Now I have that happening. So, and then actually like call the CSS by breakpoint in the HTML. Now here's the thing with this technique, the CSS for the medium, and the large are still loaded on a mobile device. So the data comes eventually. The data is the same, but it's clever enough. The browser is clever enough to know actually the only one that we need is the small version that's going to match to this breakpoint. That's the only one we need. So it prioritizes that, and everything else does still load, but after everything else is finished. So the experience, like the perception, is that it's much quicker. And I really, like, honestly, the optimization of the utilization of the CSS that we deliver, I'm really pleased with. When we did the audit with Fabian, one of the sections was he was looking at the CSS, and he actually said, I don't think you can optimize this too much more. This is like the best that I've seen in a project at NetCentric. And so, like, this obviously, like, it's a nice ego boost, but it was evidence to me that, yeah, this really worked. The other thing, which I just quickly mentioned, was that during this process, I found that splitting everything completely was kind of detrimental. I ended up with like a common file, which loaded things like header, footer, logo. They're things that were always loading. There was no point actually splitting them because they were always going to load on all the pages. Like, it didn't matter what your entry point was; these things would be needed. So I bundled those. So there is still kind of bundling, but even within that bundle, because of the splitting, it still works it out. The split still works out small, medium, and large. So you still get optimization even though you are bundling something.
That's amazing. I mean, that sounds like it is the true kind of success story that you want when you dig after this kind of a thing. It brings to mind as well, like, at our company, we have this badge system where we kind of give out almost certifications, but not so serious as that, for different topics. And one of the ones that I am the badge keeper of is CSS. And so I interview a lot of our peers for like high level CSS concepts, and we constantly have these podcast worthy conversations, and I'm sure we'll get some of them on to discuss matters, not just CSS, but everything. But one of the topics that we come back to again and again is performance within CSS, because you can really dig down. It's not just, hey, is your JavaScript performing well, which is also important, or is your what is the waterfall of things loading, but are your fonts performing well? Are your selectors also performing well, right? All of these things which contribute to the perceived speed of sites loading, moving around, and generally performance. It's fascinating how much there is to learn here. And one thing I'll touch on, which is related to it, which still blows my mind, is that, Zach Leatherman has had in the past a lot to say about fonts in particular and font loading. And there's this great page he put together where he did the hard research to go through all the different font loading strategies that you can do in order to give yourself the quickest loading time with the least effect on the user and no flash of unstyled text or flash of invisible text. And I think the end solution was that you figure out what the minimum viable font that you need to load is, the minimum number of characters, and literally there's build tools that can do that per page and literally say, oh, you're not using the letter U on this page, we won't include this in the font that we generate as the starter for this page. But I mean, it might be as simple as just doing simple alphabet instead of the extended alphabet, certainly dropping off like Cyrillic if you're not delivering it in that language set, and then base 64 inlining that in the HTML. So it makes the HTML a little bit larger to load, but there is no chance that the font will not be present when the text is seen. And then you do that for the regular font weight, and then you do faux for the italic and bold versions until you lazy load request those font variants to load. It's just mind-blowing the things that you can do to optimize everything that's going on.
Yeah, that is like just picking up on the fonts. There was something a colleague of ours, Armel. Sorry, Armel, I forget your surname, but Armel.
Cool.
It could be. I don't know.
No, he's one of my proteges.
Yeah?
It's Armel Pingle.
Okay, very good. Okay, so he actually did a blog post in NetCentric about a technique he'd seen for reducing the number of fonts on a site, and basically, it was that if you take say for instance you have 3 fonts, which I do on mine, and they're all, but the 3 fonts are just light, regular, and bold. They're the same font, but regular and bold versions and light. So the technique is, can you use CSS to take the light version and create the regular and the bold? And just by overlaying like the 2 fonts on top of each other and playing around with the CSS a little bit, you start to see whether you can get this like perfect, which is doubtful, or whether you can get this close enough that actually you could lose 1 font or maybe 2. And I actually read through this and I thought, well, I'll do a POC for the clients and see what they think. Now, the results that I got were really, really, for me, really encouraging. To manipulate the light version of the font to be like the regular version of the font, there was virtually no difference across like any size of the font, regardless of like line length or anything like that. It was close. I mean, I did the old thing where you put like green and red font colors so you can see the overlap.
I remember, yeah.
Yeah, I did this, and I did that for the bold font. Over time, it really went out. But then I started looking at how we were actually using the bold font, and in the real world, we're using the bold font for maybe like very short titles in a table, for instance. So really, it wouldn't really make that much of a difference. Anyway, I put this page together just as something, and it meant that we could lose 2 fonts, which was, I think they were like 40K each. So you're making good savings. I sent this across to the stakeholders, and it was about a 50-50 split of people who wanted it and who didn't. Obviously, the designers were going to say no.
Designers are yelling at us.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course, they're going crazy. And even when I took the first steps, when I was reading the blog before I even decided to do the POC, my thoughts were, oh, the designers are going to hate this. Like, and I get that. Like, you make a living from this. You're an expert. They know the importance of the font, of the typesetting.
It's that they see the things that we don't see in this. It's that broken window syndrome, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you walk into a neighborhood and there's a broken window. You don't even see the broken window, but you think, this is a dangerous neighborhood.
Yeah.
These little subtle background things that happen, and fonts have that. This 1 pixel extra thing on the decorator, and it makes a psychological impact that I honestly don't have the eye to see, but they do. And so I get that it's important, but you're right as well that maybe it's less important than the speed that we can shave and get back by not having to include a separate font, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the thing that didn't disappoint me that they decided not to do it. For various reasons. It wasn't just the designer. I mean, like I was basically telling them we should change your entire site. We're going to get rid of these 2 fonts. So effectively, we're going to change the entire site. I mean, when you start to factor in the testing time needed to make sure that everything is on point, like you are asking a lot. So maybe that's something that we could do down the line if we really want to. But the thing that didn't disappoint me was, with performance, from the things that I've read over the last few months, is that there's always a trade-off. So yeah, we're going to make this faster by not having these two fonts. That's a definite positive. But those little details that you've just talked about, that other experts are saying, no, this makes a difference. There we're making a trade-off. We're saying, okay, for this round, we'll take that. We're prepared to force the user to download these two extra fonts because we want the experience to be like better. We think that in this case, having the fonts correctly is worth that 80K. So and that's the thing with performance that keeps coming back. There is always trade-offs. There's always, you were all pushing in the same direction. You're all pulling in the same direction, but there are going to be points where you trade something. And so it really didn't disappoint me too much that I'd done that and that it had not gone that way. It kind of pointed to me that, hey, the stakeholders over there, they're now thinking, why would we not do this? So now they're thinking about performance.
Yeah, that's good. And it brings an interesting point, which is that you wouldn't have been able to even make that pitch if you hadn't had some sort of metric, some sort of measurements happening. And I do like that. I'm at a phase in my life where I think a lot of the problems with the world can be solved by proper metrics and performance stuff. And that's probably nonsense, but I think there's some validity in it, which is to say, you should be able to say, okay, if I make this change, it's going to, on average or on this specific device, save this many milliseconds of load time, or time to interactive is this much faster. And so there's a couple of things that have been missing in that. One is that most people just don't have that measurement tool in place. They don't have the things to even get started on those metrics, right? So you talked about like, okay, that whole site, it's going to be really difficult to see if we broke anything because, et cetera. If you had some sort of automated testing in place with visual regression tests, then that wouldn't be such a conflict. In fact, you could just run that suite with the change and say, this is what it actually affected. But without that, it's a daunting thing to get started. But that brings me into the next part of this, which is that there are now some tools that have come out. Lighthouse was maybe, one of the first ones that got big traction and people started using because so many of us use Chrome, whether that's good for the web or not. But now there's a new thing, which maybe you can talk about if you've looked into it more than I have, which is the Web Vitals. It's a simplified, I think, version of the Lighthouse score, and you can go more in depth, but it's saying like, look, these are the three things that really matter most.
Yeah, it is something that, I think it's often the case when you actually start looking at something seriously that things on Twitter start jumping out at you. And it seems like all of a sudden there's like lots of things about the subjects that you're working on at the moment. And so recently, I think this last week, seen tweets going out about Web Vitals from Google. And what this is basically they're providing three metrics. The largest contentful paint, the first input delay, and the cumulative layout shift. And it's kind of a health check on your site, but it's really snappy. And they're basically saying these are like the things that we think are most important. They're fairly self-explanatory in the names, which is something that's not always the case with performance, I've found. But largest contentful paint. So this is obviously like the biggest piece of information, or the biggest piece to your page. How quickly does that load? So, for instance, if it's like a hero banner at the top of the page, then how quickly is that loaded? And what that allows you to do is say, if this is taking up so much space on your page, this must be like the most important thing. You're dedicating so much real estate to this that this must be the most important thing. So how quickly are you getting that in front of people? And then next, we have the first input delay. So when your page is loaded, how quickly can your user use it? How quickly is there a response? If they click on a menu button, maybe they see your page loaded, but how quickly, if you click on the menu button, then what's the delay? So maybe you download like a skeleton or something like that, or you see what looks like a complete page, but actually in the background there's like tons of JavaScript going on, and if you click a button, it doesn't work, and I go back to the rage clicking then. So like then you've clicked the button like 10 times. Why the hell isn't this working? This website's crashed. I'm going somewhere else. The third vital is, let me just look, is the cumulative layout shift. So this goes back to something I talked about before. Is there anything more frustrating than a website that's loaded and you think all the content's loaded, and then suddenly you're on a different site because you clicked a link or a button and you've moved? Like the page moved, you didn't know it was going to move, but you clicked something else. Yeah. And so that's not the score for that is obviously not in seconds, but it does give a score and gives you like a green, amber, and red, like to tell you, hey, you have a problem here, or no, this is good.
Yeah. And what I like is that none of these are like make or break, right? You can do what you can, and it's not always correct. I think it's even there in like the homepage of this is, some of these are not going to make sense for you, or we're going to be wrong. Like that large thing might just be there because it has to be, and it's not the most important thing for you. Fine. But it's a good guideline to get you started on some of the things that really matter to users. Like I just experienced that content shift the other day, and it was so frustrating because it happened twice. Like I knew it was going to happen the second time, and I still was like, oh, okay, I think it's already done. And I went to click and it shifted and moved, and I clicked on the wrong thing. That was very frustrating. The other thing that I like about this is that it builds into the best practices that we've been developing over the last handful of years, which is to say, starting to think about performance and starting to think about usability as well. We've started doing things in the right ways so that when you click on something, there is a visual representation that it was clicked on, even if there's an asynchronous action that's going to happen afterwards. And this now kind of rewards you for setting that up. So you're seeing a lot of people saying like, oh, I tried out this plugin that shows me my Web Vital score, and I got greens across the board because I'd already been following the best practices. And I like that as well. It's kind of solidifying that, yeah, this is going to work if you're doing things well.
Yeah, really. Like you because the field is so big that it is nice to have like some validation, some like, oh yeah, you've done well, you've done the right things. And I think that it can be so hard it can feel so hard because there's so many metrics. And as you alluded to, some of them just don't make sense for you. Like some things you would be prepared to put up with because you want to do something else in a better way, or it's just not important to you. Maybe the presentation you feel is more important than something else being fast. As an aside, I'd just like to say that most of the time, from statistics that I've read, that's actually wrong. Like your main goal should be like make it fast. But yeah, it's nice to get some kind of reward, and I think that's why people really gravitate to Lighthouse scores, because it's like if all you ever do for performance is look at your Lighthouse score, and then just try and do things in the right way, and then go back to your Lighthouse score in a couple of months' time, and you've improved, then like that's still reward for doing the right thing. That's still reward for investing like some time in it. The biggest problem I have with the Lighthouse score is that it just varies so much, and you could explain that to yourself, but if it's really a tool that's being used by non-software engineers, just like company CEOs or something like that, then if they see a fluctuation in a Lighthouse score, then instantly alarm bells are ringing where maybe they don't need to be.
Yeah. And I think that there's another point that we should come back to before we sort of move into the last bits of the show, which is that the reason that we're focusing on performance is that study after study after study has shown that literally people just stop using your site if it is not performing well. And sometimes that doesn't seem to matter. Sometimes you're like, oh, I've done enough by bundling my JavaScript or breaking it into chunks and lazy loading. But if the new lazy loaded chunk is still 2 megabytes or whatever, that's not actually that much of a performance improvement. And I see it most because, I'm a power user. I know how to get around stuff. I generally will stick with my goal if I need to get something done, even if the thing I'm using is not performing well. But when I'm on my mobile, it's the worst. And it's not that the mobile isn't that fast. It's that there's just not always enough RAM to get things done, I guess. And especially in the mobile browsers, it just sites perform really poorly there. And it seems like even if on the browser it's fine, when I get to the mobile, it's really slow. And that can be the most frustrating experience trying to get something done. Little things like searching for something and waiting for the results to come in this fancy thing, or I know it's done in like React or Angular and it's just not working. That it's not that I'll stop using it. It's that I will have a terrible time doing it. And the next time I'm asked to use that site, I will just have a gut reaction of, oh God, not that again. So it is really an important thing to spend the time on.
I think that with the mobile performance in mind, that if you really, this goes back to principles really. If you really focus on delivering the best quality like mobile experience, then for sure like you're going to have a good desktop performance. Because if you're optimizing, if you make it good and performant on a mobile, then like the experience is only going to be better the more you go into like a desktop, a laptop. By taking care of one, the other takes care of itself. So I think that I'm guilty that I don't test enough on mobile, and I don't really like. Sometimes I don't immediately plan for mobile, where I know that actually I probably should. But it is something that's really worth like starting with.
Yeah, it definitely is. And we talk a lot about, responsive web design and doing mobile first. And one of the things, and this is a free tip for anyone that's going for CSS badge within Netcentric anyway, but one of the things I think is really important to understand is the reason that mobile first, at least in CSS, is a good idea, is that by default, you are giving the browser only the simplest stuff that you need to get it looking right. And then it should scale until you need to change the styles. Whereas if you wrote the desktop first and then revised for mobile, you would have to send twice as much CSS to get started, basically. The browser would have to read through both rule sets and be like, oh, okay, we're not on this breakpoint. I will have to revert what I just drew in and use this instead. It just is a lot less there. And the same is true for JavaScript. So I find that is a really nice coincidence that if you focus on optimizing your site for mobile, responsive, etc., in terms of all the stuff that you do, you will have a better performing desktop site as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Nice. Okay. So getting close to our kind of time mark, I wanted to introduce a new segment. We're going to move away from listener questions for a while and instead focus on basically focusing on heroes, true front-end heroes that are working across the planet, and each of us will sort of, and if we have guests in the future, just offer up someone, give them a bit of encouragement and praise for doing the great things that they do. I can start. I wanted to highlight, there's a person within our organization. She is very on top of the ball. She's really one of the highest level front-enders we have within the company, but she's gotten there through really determined work and is speaking at tons of conferences and has become a Google developer expert as well, really pushing the boundaries and being an inspiring role model, but also getting people started on things. So encouraging people to focus on performance and get started and take up responsibilities in that area. And then doing accessibility and getting people to work on accessibility matters as well. And then going into frameworks and build systems and so on. And I'm just continually impressed by her. So a big shout out to Natalia Vendito, one of our honestly true front-end heroes. And feel free to follow her on Twitter. We'll put that in the show notes, link to her. Scott, what about you?
Well, I'd just like to say as well, I'm, as you are, continually impressed by Natalia. And honestly, I don't know where she finds the time for everything, because she's a mother as well. So like, I just like, all props to her. Like she's done an incredible job over the last few years, especially like her rise since I started at the company has just been incredible, and it's all through very hard work. So all credit to her. I would like, sticking with the performance and the things that I've been reading a lot, especially on Twitter just recently, and the Web Vitals. I would like to highlight Adi Osmani, who is an engineering manager at Google. Now, like, it was, I don't think it's any surprise. I don't think it's a name that people haven't heard of. But I think that his output, his blogs, his tweets, everything that the guy puts out there, I think is worth reading. And I first heard about him maybe like 6-7 years ago when I was working at a company in the UK. And we just had this 21-year-old start at the company. And he came in and he basically just started talking about Adi Osmani. This guy says this guy says that. And a few of us in the office were like, who is this guy? But this young kid, he knew him and he knew all about him, and he was basically painting him as like god of front end. And I think that since then I've kind of kept an eye on like his output. And I think that he's just done the information that he puts out there is just really, really valuable. And I think that if he recommends something, then it is worth reading. It's like a guaranteed seal of quality. So I'd just like to highlight him as like a front end hero.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I think that he's been the one of the pushing forces behind like focusing on performance within the web community. Like, okay, we need intersection observer, we need resize observer, we need something to help people, that just a general like Web Vitals, for example, and Lighthouse as well. I mean, this guy has really been on top of that, and I like that. When you listen to him speak as well, you see a lot of empathy there, and I think that's a sign of someone that really cares about the community. There are a lot of other people we can highlight. If you have suggestions, send them in to us. I mean, hidden corners of the web, and not everyone's on Twitter. So yeah, please reach out, and we'll feature them next time, and go on from there. Another thing that we want to add at the end of our shows is that, any proper hero is a well-rounded one. And so we just want to share some simple music picks, that things we've been listening to. So Scott, what is the favorite thing that you've been listening to lately? Well,
I listened on repeat to the new Strokes album for a few weeks. It's kind of like showing my age, and I feel like I was old to be listening to the Strokes when they first came out, but even older now. But man, the album is called The New Abnormal, which seems really prescient considering it was like released in the middle of lockdown, and there's their first album for like 7 years or something like that. So they had no idea that this was going to happen, but then came up with a great title that's particularly relevant. But honestly, I've really enjoyed it, and like, I would recommend like taking that in. What about you? What have you been listening to? What's been getting you through?
Yeah, I have very diverse tastes in music, and I'm debating what to actually share because I've got 3 different variations. I mean, I listen to a lot of I don't know, like what even the genre is anymore. electronic stuff, I guess. I don't know. Honestly, I don't know what genre it is. Chiptune was a few years ago. I've kind of melded into other stuff since then. But then there's also a lot of singer-songwriter stuff and classical music. And I think in this case, I want to highlight the classical music. So I've been listening to this artist, Joep Beving, Joep Beving. He, I don't know, just came out of nowhere into the classical music scene, well, modern classical music, a little while ago. It was very nice piano pieces, really quiet. He had to write them when he was at his grandmother's house and she was sick, and so he had to play very quietly. And they're just beautiful little, like, Eric Satie vibe kind of music, and darker as well. But he's since progressed and gotten further and brought in some electronic influences as well, and some, other instruments. It's just really interesting, I don't know, tangible music to listen to when you really need kind of contemplative stuff. And that's as opposed to my normal listening cycles of, like, there's no gaps in the electronic music that I listen to. It's just pure noise for a while. So yeah, every now and then I'll put that on. I like to also put it on as background music during stand-ups or other video conference calls I have, because no one else can hear it, but it changes the mood, which is really fun.
Nice. I'll check that out. I just quickly looked at him, and he really, like, there's a picture of him, and he really looks like a colleague of ours.
I know. Yeah, I know. It's amazing, actually. So yeah, there you go. Okay. That looks like all the time we have for today, folks. So thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please like, heart, star us in your podcatcher of choice. Those reviews and ratings are how the algorithms that they have help people find our content. So the power to help is within you. If you have any questions or topics you want covered in our future episodes, send us a tweet to @HeroesFrontend, and we will add it to our list. So until next time, heroes, remember, with great front-end power comes great responsibility. See you next time.